Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the dreamscape of history. Before we begin, if this journey into the silent, shadowed lives of the past resonates with you, consider subscribing, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I also love reading your comments, so please let me know where in the world you are and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin our long night in a small grey market town. It could be in England, or perhaps Scotland, in the year 1650. The sky is overcast. A drizzle of cold rain falls on the cobblestones, making them slick and dark. The air smells of wet wool, wood smoke, and the damp earth of the unpaved streets. The market is busy. People are shouting, selling turnips, haggling over cloth. But then the noise changes. It shifts from the hum of commerce to the sharp, cruel laughter of a crowd. A procession is coming. You step closer to see. Walking in the center of the street is a woman. She is not a criminal in the way we think of them today. She has not stolen gold. She has not murdered anyone. Her crime was speaking. She was accused of being a scold, a nag, a gossip, a woman who raised her voice against her husband or her neighbors. And for this crime, she is wearing a mask. But this is not a mask of carnival velvet. It is a mask of iron. It is called the Scold's Bridle, or the Branks. It is a cage for the head. Heavy, black strips of iron wrap around her skull. One band goes over the top of her head, another around her forehead, and a third, the most terrible one, locks around her jaw. It looks like a horse's bridle, and the symbolism is intentional. A horse is a beast of burden that must be tamed, controlled, broken. And in the eyes of the law, so is this woman. She walks with her head bowed, not just from shame, but from the weight. The iron is heavy. It presses into her skin. The rain runs down the middle, rusting it slightly, leaving streaks of orange on her pale face. She cannot wipe them away. Her hands are tied behind her back. A man walks in front of her, perhaps the town beadle, or even her own husband. He holds a chain attached to the front of the mask. He leads her through the mud like an animal. He tugs the chain occasionally, forcing her to stumble. The crowd laughs. They throw rotten vegetables or mud. But she does not scream, she does not cry out. She cannot. Because the true cruelty of the Scold's Bridle is hidden inside her mouth. Let us imagine the sensation of wearing it. The blacksmith who made it was not concerned with comfort. He was concerned with silence. Inside the iron cage, there is a metal bite. It is about 2 inches long. When the mask is locked onto the head, this plate is forced into the mouth. It sits on top of the tongue, pressing it down, flattening it against the floor of the mouth. In the gentler versions, the plate is smooth. It simply holds the tongue immobile. You cannot form words. You can only make guttural, choking sounds. You cannot swallow easily. Saliva builds up. And because you cannot close your lips fully around the iron, it drools down your chin. It is a design of pure humiliation. But in the crueler versions, and there were many, the plate was not smooth. It was spiked. Sharp iron points on the underside of the bit, or perhaps a row of rotating wheels with jagged edges. If the woman tries to speak, if she moves her tongue even slightly in protest,
The spikes tear into the soft tissue. Her mouth fills with blood. The pain is immediate and shocking. It teaches a brutal lesson in Pavlovian conditioning. To speak is to bleed. To be silent is to survive. So she learns to be still. She freezes her jaw. She suppresses the urge to cough, to swallow, to cry. She becomes a statue of flesh and iron. The mask itself was often decorated, but not with beauty, with mockery. Some had long metal ears attached, like a donkey. Others had a pig's snout welded to the front, or a bell on a spring that jingled with every step, drawing more attention to her shame. She is paraded through the streets for hours. She is chained to the market cross, the stone pillar in the center of town. She is left there while the village goes about its day. Children stare at her. Dogs bark at her. She is an object, a warning. Every woman who walks past her looks and then looks away. They touch their own throats. They lower their own voices. The message is clear. This could be you. If you complain about the price of bread, if you argue with your husband when he comes home drunk, if you speak your mind too loudly, the iron cage is waiting.
The physical pain of the bridle is terrible. The metal chafes the skin of the face, leaving raw, red sores. The neck muscles spasm from the weight. The teeth ache from the pressure of the bit. But the psychological wound is deeper. This punishment is a theft of humanity. Speech is what makes us human. It is how we defend ourselves, how we express love, anger, fear. To have that ability mechanically removed, to be reduced to a mute animal, is a trauma that lasts long after the padlock is opened. When she is finally released, perhaps at sundown, she is different. The blacksmith unlocks the device. The iron clambers to the ground. She spits out the blood and the bile. She rubs her bruised jaw. But she does not speak. Not immediately. The silence has entered her. She goes home to a house that feels smaller, colder. She knows now that her voice is not her own. It is a privilege that can be revoked by the town council. For the rest of her life, she might bear the scars, small white lines on her tongue, a stiffness in her jaw. But the real scar is the fear, the hesitation before every word, the constant, low-level dread that the iron mask is hanging on a hook in the town hall, waiting for her to slip up again. It was a specialized torture. Men were punished in the stocks or whipped, but the bridle was almost exclusively for women. It targeted the one thing they had, their voice. We leave the woman sitting by her fire, rubbing her aching face, staring into the flames in silence. We leave the iron mask rusting in the rain of the market square. We travel now to another part of the town, to the riverbank, or perhaps the village pond. The water is dark, cold, covered in a layer of green scum. There is a crowd gathering here too. They are setting up a device, a long wooden beam balanced on a pivot like a seesaw, and at the end of the beam, hanging over the freezing water, is a chair. This is the cooking stool, another tool designed to cool the hot tongues of women. But this time, the punishment is not just silence, it is suffocation. It is the terror of the drowning reflex, played out as public entertainment. We leave the rusted iron of the Scold's bridle in the market square and follow the crowd down a muddy lane. The air grows cooler here, damper. We are heading towards the water. It might be the village pond, stagnant and covered in duckweed, or perhaps the river,
running fast in grey under the stone bridge. On the bank, a strange wooden structure has been erected. It looks like a piece of siege equipment, a catapult designed not to throw stones, but to lower a human being. This is the cooking stool, or the ducking stool. The terms were often used interchangeably, though the punishment varied in cruelty. The device is simple. A long, sturdy wooden beam is balanced on a pivot post. On one end of the beam, suspended by a rope or a chain, is a chair. It is not a comfortable chair. It is a rough wooden seat, sometimes with an iron bar to hold the occupant in place. The crowd gathers on the bank. Men, women, children. They are eating pies. They are betting on how many times the chair will go down. It is a spectacle, a piece of public theatre where the ticket price is someone else's dignity. The victim is brought forward. She is often a woman accused of being disorderly. Perhaps she argued with her neighbours. Perhaps she brewed bad ale. Perhaps she simply refused to be quiet. In the eyes of the medieval village, a loud woman was a threat to the social order. She was a fire that had to be doused. She is forced into the chair. The wood is rough against her back. Her wrists are tied. Her ankles are bound. She looks out at the water. It is murky, cold. It smells of rotting leaves and silt. The bailiff, or the strongest men in the village, take hold of the other end of the beam. They grasp the ropes. They wait for the signal. The woman closes her eyes. She takes a deep breath, trying to fill her lungs before the air is stolen from her. The crowd falls silent. The only sound is the rushing of the river and the creaking of the wood. Creak. The beam lifts. The chair swings out over the water. She is suspended there, feet dangling, hovering between the earth and the abyss. A pendulum of shame.
Then the drop. Splash. The chair plunges into the water. It is not a gentle immersion, it is a violent impact. The cold shock is immediate. It knocks the breath out of her. The dirty water rushes into her nose, her mouth, her ears. She is submerged. The world above, the shouting crowd, the grey sky is replaced by a suffocating brown silence. She is weightless, yet trapped. The heavy wool of her dress soaks up the water instantly, becoming a lead weight dragging her down. She holds her breath. Her lungs burn. She opens her eyes in the panic, seeing only the swirling mud and the legs of the chair. She wonders if they will pull her up, or if the rope will snap, or if they will simply forget her there in the dark. Then the beam rises. She breaks the surface. Gasp! She sucks in the air, coughing, sputtering. The water streams off her hair, plastering it to her skull. She is shivering violently. The crowd cheers. They laugh. They point. But it is not over. The sentence is rarely just one, ducking. It is 3 or 5, or until she is cooled. Down she goes again. The second time is worse. The anticipation is gone, replaced by the reality of the cold. Her body is already in shock. Her limbs are numb. The water feels thicker this time, heavier. This punishment was designed to humiliate, but it was also dangerous. If the water was freezing, the shock could stop the heart. If the chair hit the riverbed, she could break a bone. Many women died in the Cucking Stool, not from drowning, but from the aftermath, the pneumonia, the water fever that settled in the chest and never left. It was a way of washing away her voice. The symbolism is blunt. You used your mouth to speak sin. We will fill your mouth with mud. You were hot with anger. We will freeze you into submission. By the third time she rises, she is silent. She is limp. She does not cough. She just hangs in the ropes, a wet, broken doll, dripping onto the surface of the river.
Finally, the beam is swung back to the bank. The chair is lowered to the mud. The ropes are untied. She falls out of the seat. She cannot stand. Her legs are too cold. She crawls through the slime of the riverbank. The crowd begins to disperse. The show is over. They have seen what they wanted to see. Order has been restored. The unruly woman has been tamed. She is left there, shivering, humiliated. Her clothes are ruined. Her reputation is destroyed. When she walks home, dripping wet, leaving a trail of river water on the cobblestones, no one will look her in the eye. She has become a Scold, a marked woman. We leave the damp riverbank. We leave the shivering woman drying her hair. We travel now to the open countryside, to the legal system of the Middle Ages. We are going to explore a crime that was terrifyingly common, yet strangely defined. A crime where a woman could be stolen from her home, forced into marriage, and the law would treat it not as an assault on her, but as a property dispute between men. We are entering the world of Raptus, the stolen bride. And in this story, the woman is not a person. She is a prize.
We leave the public humiliation of the ducking stool and the jeering crowds of the village. We travel out into the silence of the open road. It is twilight. The shadows of the trees are stretching long across the dirt track. The air is still, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. You are a woman of some standing, perhaps the daughter of a merchant or a minor noble. You are travelling with a small retinue, a maid, a groom. You feel safe. You are property of value and therefore protected. But suddenly the silence is broken. The thunder of hooves, the shouting of men. A group of riders bursts from the tree line. They are armed. They are masked, but they are not bandits looking for gold. They are looking for you. The groom is knocked aside. The maid screams. Hands grab you. Rough leather gloves on your arms. You are lifted, hoisted onto the back of a horse. The world spins. The ground rushes away. And then you are galloping into the dark. This is Raptus. In Latin, the word means seized, carried off. It is the root of our modern word rapture, but also of rape. In the Middle Ages, the distinction between the two was terrifyingly blurred. You have been stolen, not for ransom, but for marriage. This was the reality of the abduction marriage, a practice that haunted the medieval world. If a man wanted a woman, but her father refused the match or the dowry was too high, he might simply take her. He would carry her off to a friend's castle or a remote hideout, and there he would force a marriage, sometimes with a corrupt priest, sometimes with no priest at all. He would consummate the union by force, and in doing so, he would change your legal status forever. You are no longer a maiden. You are a wife, or a spoiled woman, and in the eyes of the medieval world, you now belong to him. The abduction was the proposal, the violence was the ceremony.
Imagine the terror of that ride, pressed against the armor of a stranger, the wind whipping your hair, knowing that with every mile your old life is disappearing. Your name, your family, your choices are falling away behind you like dust on the road. You are being rewritten. You are becoming a possession.
But the true horror of raptus was not found in the woods. It was found in the courtroom. Let us imagine the aftermath. Your father or your brothers pursue the abductor. They bring him before a judge. A trial is held. But as you stand there, shivering, bruised, traumatized, you realize something chilling. The trial is not about you. In medieval law, raptus was often not classified as a crime against the person. It was a crime against property. You were the property. The abductor had damaged your father's goods. He had stolen a valuable asset, the ability to arrange a political marriage. The argument in the court is not about your suffering. It is about your value. It is about the dowry. It is about the insult to your father's honor. You are the chalice that was stolen from the altar. You are the horse that was taken from the stable. You are an object of dispute. And the defense? The abductor might argue that you came willingly. He might say you smiled at him once, or that you did not scream loud enough. In England, the law required a woman to raise the hue and cry immediately. If she did not scream, if she was too terrified to make a sound, the law assumed she consented. And then the cruelest twist of all. The solution. Often the judge and the families would decide that the best way to fix the crime was to let the marriage stand. After all, the woman was now ruined. No one else would want her. The abductor, by stealing her, had made himself her only option. So, a deal is struck. The abductor pays a fine to the father, a transfer of funds. The theft is paid for. And you are sent home with the thief. You have to live with him, the man who grabbed you, the man who dragged you into the dark. You have to bear his children. You have to run his household. You have to smile at him across the dinner table for the rest of your life. This was the remedy of the law. The crime became the punishment, and the victim became the prize.
Historians look at the records and they see the word raptus everywhere. Even the famous poet Geoffrey Chaucer, the father of English literature, was accused of raptus. The records are vague. Was it abduction? Was it assault? We will never know. But the charge was settled. Money changed hands, and the woman's voice vanishes from history. For the woman living in this forced union, survival required a fracturing of the self. You had to bury the anger. You had to bury the fear. You had to learn to love, or at least tolerate, your captor. It was a medieval version of Stockholm Syndrome, enforced by the church and the state. She would wear the clothes he bought her. She would answer to the name he gave her, but inside, in the quiet corners of her mind, she remained the girl on the road, the girl who was stolen. The law of raptus teaches us that in the Middle Ages, a woman's body was a battlefield, a territory to be conquered, claimed, and negotiated over. She was a spectator in her own life. We leave the courtroom. We leave the woman walking away with her new husband, her head bowed, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the man who stole her. We travel now from the dangers of men to the dangers of belief. We go to the edge of the village again, to the water. But this is not the river of the Cucking Stool. This is a deep, dark pond,
a place of judgment. We are going to witness a trial where physics and faith collide. A trial where a woman is thrown into the water to see if the element itself will reject her. We are entering the era of the witch hunt and the logic of the swimming test, where floating means guilt and sinking means death.
We leave the suffocating logic of the courtroom and the woman forced to marry her captor. We walk out of the town, past the fields, to a place that should be serene. The village pond, or perhaps a deep, slow-moving section of the river. The water is dark, glassy. It reflects the grey clouds above, looking like a portal to another world. But the crowd gathered on the bank is not here to admire the view. They are here for a test, a trial by ordeal. In the center of the circle stands a woman. She is usually older, perhaps a widow, perhaps a healer who knew too much about herbs, or perhaps just a woman who looked at a neighbor's cow the wrong way before it died. She has been accused of witchcraft. In the medieval and early modern mind, witchcraft was not a fairy tale. It was a clear and present danger, a treason against God. And because it was a spiritual crime, hidden in the soul, normal evidence was useless. You couldn't find a receipt for a sold soul, so you had to ask nature itself to testify. You had to ask the water. This is the swimming test. The logic is terrifyingly symbolic. Water is the element of baptism. It is pure, holy. The belief was that if a woman had renounced her baptism to serve the devil, the water would know. The pure element would reject the impure vessel. It would refuse to accept her. So, if she floats, she is guilty. The water is pushing her away. If she sinks, she is innocent. The water is embracing her. Imagine the terror of that equation. To prove your innocence, you must simulate your own death. The preparation is ritualistic and cruel. The woman is stripped to her undergarments. They search her for witches' marks, moles, scars, or insensitive patches of skin. Then they bind her. But they do not just tie her hands behind her back, they bind her crosswise. Her right thumb is tied to her left toe. Her left thumb is tied to her right toe. She is trussed up like a fowl. Her body is bent into an unnatural, painful arch. This is to ensure she cannot swim. She cannot tread water. She is entirely at the mercy of physics and faith. A rope is tied round her waist. This is the safety line, held by men on opposite banks. They claim it is to pull her out if she sinks, but as you look at their faces, hard, fearful, and suspicious, you wonder how quickly they will pull, or if they will let her sink just deep enough to be sure. The moment arrives. 2 strong men lift her. She is light, wasted by days in the dungeon and fear. She is crying, or praying, or perhaps she has gone silent, paralyzed by the impossibility of her situation. They swing her. Once, twice, splash. She hits the water. The ripples spread out, disturbing the reflection of the sky. The crowd leans forward. The silence is absolute. Even the birds seem to stop singing. Everyone is waiting for the verdict of the pond. She goes under. The cold water rushes into her nose. Her vision turns brown and murky. She is disoriented, bound hand and foot,
She cannot right herself. She tumbles in the dark. And then the physics take over. This was the cruelest part of the test. Clothing, a woman's shift, made of heavy linen or wool, traps air. As she hits the water, the fabric billows out. It creates a temporary pocket of buoyancy. She rises. She bobs to the surface. A gasp goes through the crowd. "She swims!" someone shouts. The water rejects her. To the mob, this is proof. Supernatural proof. No normal human bound that way could float. It must be the devil holding her. They pick up stones. They scream curses. She is floating, terrified, choking on water. And in doing so, she has just signed her own death warrant. But sometimes the air escapes. The wool soaks through, and she sinks. Down, down into the mud and the weeds. The crowd watches the bubbles rise. They wait. She is innocent, the priest might say, nodding sagely. God has accepted her. They let her stay down for a moment, to be sure. The line between a thorough test and a drowning is very thin. Finally, the men on the bank haul on the ropes. They drag her up through the slime. She breaks the surface, gasping, retching, blue with cold. She is dragged onto the grass. She lies there, vomiting river water. She is alive. She is innocent, but she is broken.
The innocent woman is untied. Her thumbs are bruised. Her back is strained. She is shivering violently from the shock. She is told she can go home. But go home to what? Her reputation is stained. She was accused. The neighbors will still look at her with suspicion. She sank this time, they might whisper, but maybe she used a spell to weigh herself down. And if she floated, she is dragged from the water not to freedom, but to the stake or the gallows. The water was only the preliminary hearing. The fire is the sentence. The trial by water reveals a society paralyzed by paranoia. They were so afraid of the invisible enemy, the witch, that they abandoned reason. They created a test where the only good outcome was near death. It was a trap designed for the marginalized, the weird, the lonely. If you didn't fit in, if you were a difficult woman, the water was waiting. It was a way for the community to cleanse itself of its anxieties, using the bodies of its most vulnerable members as litmus paper. As the sun sets over the pond, the crowd disperses. They feel safer. Justice has been done. The water is still again. The reflection of the sky returns, calm and indifferent. It does not care about guilt or innocence. It only cares about density. We leave the silent pond. We leave the shivering woman on the bank. We travel away from the village, following the dust of a marching army. We are going to war. But we are not looking at the knights in shining armor. We are looking at the people walking behind them. In the mud. In the rain. There is a woman there. She carries a heavy pack. She wears tattered clothes. She is not a soldier, but she lives on the battlefield. She is a camp follower, and her life is one of the most dangerous and forgotten existences in history. She belongs to no one, and yet the army cannot survive without her. We leave the ripples of the village pond and the silent judgment of the water. We travel to the open road again. But this time, the road is not lonely. It is crowded. It is choked with dust. The ground shakes with the tramp of thousands of feet. We are following a medieval army, a crusade, or perhaps a campaign in the 100 Years' War. We see the banners fluttering ahead, the knights on their war horses, sunlight glinting off their armor. They look glorious.
They are the hearers of the songs, but we are not looking at them. We are looking behind them at the baggage train, the tail of the dragon. Here, trudging through the mud, is a second army, an army of the uncounted. There are wagons piled high with tents, barrels of ale, and weapons, and walking beside them are the women. They are the camp followers. In the official chronicles, they are barely mentioned. If they are dismissed as a nuisance. Whores and vagabonds, the generals called them. But without them, the army would collapse in a week. There is a woman walking there. Her feet are wrapped in rags. She carries a heavy bundle on her back, her entire life. She might be the wife of a foot soldier, or a widow who had nowhere else to go, or a laundress, a title that often covered a multitude of sins and services. Her life is a permanent migration. She has no home but the campfire, no roof but the sky. She walks 20 miles a day, in the rain, in the heat, carrying water, carrying wood, carrying children. She is essential. Who washes the blood and lice from the tunics? Who cooks the pottage when the soldiers are too exhausted to move? Who tends the wounds after the skirmish? She does. But she has no rank. She has no salary. She exists on the scraps, the leftover bread, the coins tossed for a mended shirt or a moment of comfort. She is entirely dependent on the protection of a soldier. If he dies, she is destitute. She becomes common property, a ghost drifting through the tents, vulnerable to anyone who decides to take what she has.
The camp at night is a city of canvas and smoke. It smells of roasting meat, sweat, and latrines. The noise is constant. Drunken songs, arguments, the sharpening of swords. For the camp follower, there is no privacy. She sleeps under a wagon or in a crowded tent. She learns to sleep with one eye open. In a place dominated by armed men, violence is a language everyone speaks fluently. During a siege, her life becomes a nightmare of waiting. The army surrounds a castle. They dig in. The weeks turn into months. Disease strikes. Dysentery, the bloody flux. It sweeps through the camp. The women become the nurses. They move among the sick, wiping brows, cleaning filth. They're exposed to the contagion every day. Thousands of women died in the camps of dysentery, buried in shallow graves by the side of the road, forgotten before the dirt was even packed down. And if the battle comes, she does not fight, but she is on the battlefield. She watches from the ridge. She waits to see if her protector falls. If the army wins, there is loot. She might find a silver cup or a piece of fine cloth, a momentary windfall. But if the army loses, that is the terror that keeps her moving. A defeated army scatters. The knights might be ransomed. The foot soldiers might be killed or enslaved. But the women, they are the spoils of war. When the enemy cavalry rides down the baggage train, there is no mercy. They are captured. They are taken. They are absorbed into the new army or sold. Her loyalty is dictated by survival. She might wash the shirts of the French king's men 1 month and the English king's men the next. She has no country. She belongs to the war itself.
There is a grim task that falls to the women after the fighting stops, the harvest of the dead. When the trumpets fade and the sun sets over the field of corpses, the women come out. They move like shadows among the fallen. They are looking for their husbands, their sons, their lovers. but they are also looking for survival. They strip the dead. A pair of good boots is worth a fortune. A woolen cloak can mean the difference between life and death next winter. They take knives, belts, coins. It seems heartless to us to rob the dead, but in the economy of the camp, it is practicality. The dead do not need boots, the living do. History has painted these women as parasites, vultures, but they were simply survivors clinging to the edge of a violent world. They endured the same marches as the soldiers. They starved when the supplies ran out. They froze in the winter sieges. Yet there are no monuments to the unknown laundress. There are no statues of the gooseherd's daughter who followed the crusade to Jerusalem and died in the sand. They are the invisible mortar that held the medieval war machine together. We leave the noise of the camp. We leave the smoke and the bloody boots. We travel away from the crowds, away from the endless marching. We seek a place of absolute stillness, a place where a woman might go to escape the violence of the world by walling herself out of it. We are going to a church, but we are not going inside the nave. We are going to a small stone cell built against the outer wall. There is no door, only a small window. Inside, there is a woman. She has been there for 20 years, and she will never leave. We are about to meet the Anchoress, the woman who chose to be buried alive.
We leave the chaotic, muddy tracks of the marching army and the women scavenging among the dead. We seek sanctuary. We travel to a quiet village churchyard. It is early morning. The mist is clinging to the yew trees. The bell in the tower is tolling, a slow, rhythmic knell. This is usually the sound of a funeral, and indeed a funeral is taking place. There is a procession, a bishop in his robes, a priest swinging a censer of incense, and a woman. But the woman is not in a coffin. She is walking. She carries a candle. She is dressed in simple, rough clothes. She looks pale, perhaps trembling slightly, but her eyes are fixed forward. She is walking towards her own grave. This is the ceremony of enclosure. The woman is becoming an anchoress. She walks to the side of the church. Built directly against the cold stone wall of the sanctuary is a small cell, a room perhaps 8 feet by 8 feet. It has no door, only a hole in the masonry where the bricks have not yet been laid. She steps inside. The bishop recites the office of the dead. He sprinkles dust on the floor of the cell. Earth to earth, he intones, ashes to ashes. He is legally and spiritually declaring her dead to the world. She is no longer a citizen. She is a soul suspended in stone. She lies down on a hard wooden bench, or perhaps directly on the dirt floor. And then the masons step forward. Scrape, clink, scrape. The sound of the trowel, the sound of stone being placed upon stone. They are bricking her in. She watches the rectangle of light shrink, smaller and smaller, until, with the placement of the final stone, the world disappears. She is alone in the dark. She will never leave this room again. She will eat here. She will sleep here. She will pray here, and eventually she will die here.
Her body will be buried under the very floor she is standing on. Why? Why would anyone choose this? To us, it looks like madness, a prison sentence. But to a medieval woman, the anchor hold offered something rare: safety. In a world of raptus, of forced marriage, of dangerous childbirth, the cell was a refuge. It was a place where no man could touch her, where the chaos of the world could not reach. She was trading her freedom of movement for freedom of the soul.
Let us sit with her in the cell. The darkness is not absolute. There are windows, small, narrow slits called squints. The first squint looks into the church. It is positioned perfectly so that even while kneeling in her cell, she can see the high altar. She can see the priest lifting the host. She can hear the Mass. This is her spiritual lifeline, the hagioscope. Through this slit, she partakes in the divine. The second squint looks into a small parlour or service room. This is where her maid, yes, she often had a servant living outside, would pass her food: a bowl of pottage, a loaf of bread, a bucket of water. And through this window, she would pass out her waste. It was a humble existence, entirely dependent on the charity of the parish. And the third squint? That one looked out at the world, into the graveyard or the village square. And this window turned the Anchoress into a celebrity. She was the living saint. People would travel for miles to stand by the damp wall of the church and whisper into the window. They sought advice, prayers, wisdom from the woman who had already died. She was the village oracle, the medieval therapist. Julian of Norwich, the famous mystic and writer, was an anchoress. She lived in a cell attached to St. Julian's Church for decades. She wrote the first book in the English language by a woman, Revelations of Divine Love. She wrote of optimism. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Imagine writing those words while locked in a stone box during a plague. It speaks to a mental fortitude that is hard to comprehend. But not every anchoress was a Julian. For some, the cell became a tomb of the mind. The sensory deprivation, the cold, the damp seeping into the bones, the smell of one's own body in a confined space. There are stories of anchoresses going mad, screaming in the night, clawing at the stones until their fingers bled. But the wall was thick, and the bishop held the key to a door that no longer existed. Once you were enclosed, you were a vessel of God, and God does not break his seal.
There was a distinct smell associated with the anchor hold, the odour of sanctity, or, more realistically, the smell of unwashed humanity mixed with incense. Because she could not leave, she could not bathe. Hygiene was a penance. Some anchoresses wore hair shirts, garments made of coarse animal hair next to their skin to induce itching and discomfort, a constant reminder of the suffering of Christ. In the winter, the cell was a refrigerator. The stone walls sucked the heat out of the air. She might have a small brazier, but fuel was scarce. She would wrap herself in wool, huddled in the corner, listening to the wind howling around the church tower. In the summer, it was an oven. The air stagnated. Flies buzzed through the squints. And yet, they stayed for 20, 30, 40 years. They became part of the architecture, a beating heart inside the masonry. When death finally came, it was not a tragedy. It was a release,
the final wall falling away. The grave was dug inside the cell. The earth was turned. She was laid to rest in the same soil she had knelt on for a lifetime. The cell was then cleaned, whitewashed, and often another woman was waiting, ready to step in, ready to take her place in the dark. The line of succession continued. The hunger for isolation was endless. We leave the Anchoress to her prayers. We step away from the squint and the sound of her whispering voice, and we turn to a prison of a different kind. We are going to talk about a myth, a legend of metal and jealousy, the Chastity Belt. We have all seen them in cartoons, in comedies, the knight locking up his wife before going on a crusade. But the reality of the iron belt is far stranger and far darker than the jokes suggest. It brings us back to the theme of control, of the female body as a fortress that must be guarded, not by the woman herself, but by the man who claims to own her.
We leave the stone cell of the Anchoress and the silence of the walled-in life. We travel now into the realm of legend, to a story that has been told in taverns and written in satires for centuries. Picture a knight. He is preparing for the Crusades. He sits on his horse, clad in shining armor. He holds a key. He hands it to his best friend, or perhaps a priest, and back in the castle tower his wife sits weeping. She is wearing a device of iron, a belt locked around her waist, ensuring that no man can touch her while her husband is away. This is the Chastity Belt, the ultimate symbol of medieval jealousy, the heavy, rusted proof of male ownership. But let us look closer at this object. Let us step past the joke and look at the metal. Imagine wearing it, a heavy hoop of iron around your waist, a metal plate passing between your legs. The edges are rough, the metal is cold. Now imagine wearing it for a week, or a month, or the 3 years of a crusade. The human body is not designed to be encased in iron. The metal would chafe, it would rub the skin raw, the sweat and the waste would accumulate, infection would set in within days, iron poisoning, sepsis. If the legends were true, if women were actually locked in these things for years, they would not have remained chaste. They would have died, a slow, agonizing death of gangrene and fever. So where does the truth lie? Historians have examined the medieval chastity belts in museums, the ones displayed in the Tower of London or the Cluny Museum in Paris, and they found something surprising. Most of them are fakes. They were not made in the Middle Ages. They were made in the 19th century by Victorians. The Victorians were obsessed with the barbaric past. They wanted to believe that their ancestors were cruel and sexually repressed. So they forged the belts. They created the artifact to match the myth. They built the nightmare they wanted to see. But that does not mean the idea didn't exist. It existed as a terrifying metaphor. In medieval literature, men spoke of locking up their wives, of sealing the garden. The belt was a symbol of control, a heavy imaginary chain that bound a woman to her husband even when he was 1,000 miles away. However, there is a sliver of truth, a rare and darker reality that hides behind the Victorian fakes. In the Renaissance, in the cities of Italy like Venice and Florence, there are records of girdles of chastity, but they were not always forced upon women by jealous husbands. Sometimes they were worn by choice. We return to the fear of raptus, the fear of the stolen bride. If a woman had to travel, if she had to cross bandit country or stay in an inn where the locks were flimsy,
She might wear a corset of defense. It was armor, not against temptation, but against assault. Imagine the psychology of that, strapping yourself into a cage of iron, tolerating the pain and the bruising, because the world outside is so dangerous that being locked up feels safer than being free. It transforms the object from a tool of oppression into a tool of desperate survival. But there were also instances of cruelty, of control. There are court records of women suing their husbands for forcing them to wear hard things, iron bands, not for years, but for days, to enforce obedience, to punish a suspected glance. In these cases, the belt was a torture device. It was a physical manifestation of the husband's legal right. Under medieval law, the wife was coverture. Her legal identity was covered by her husband. She did not exist as a separate entity. Her body was his property. So if he wanted to lock his property, he could. The terror of the chastity belt is not in the mechanics, it is in the mindset. It is the idea that a woman's fidelity is not a choice, but a mechanism, that trust is impossible, so iron must take its place.
The myth of the belt reveals a deep anxiety in the medieval male mind, the fear of the ungovernable woman, the belief that women were naturally lascivious, naturally sinful, and that without a literal lock they would stray. It is the same fear that created the Scold's Bridle, the same fear that fueled the witch trials, the need to contain the female, to shut her mouth, to bind her hands, to lock her body. But nature has a way of mocking our attempts at control. You can lock a belt around a waist, you can lock a mask onto a face, but you cannot stop the biological realities of being a woman. We leave the rusted iron of the museum case, we leave the Victorian forgeries and the Renaissance armor. We travel now to a place where no iron can help. We are going to a bedroom. The curtains are drawn tight to keep out the light. The fire is built up high. The room is hot, stiflingly hot. It smells of blood and herbs and fear. A woman is lying in the bed. She is not a prisoner of a belt. She is a prisoner of her own biology. She is about to face the greatest killer of medieval women. It is not a plague. It is not a war. It is childbirth. They called it the battlefield. And for a woman in the Middle Ages, stepping into this room was like stepping onto the front lines. She has made her will. She has said her goodbyes, because she knows that once the labor begins, there is no turning back, and there is no guarantee she will ever leave this room alive.
We leave the museum of forged iron belts and the legends of locked wives. We travel to a place that is all too real. A place where the walls are draped in heavy tapestries, not to look beautiful, but to block out every crack of light and every draught of air. We are standing in the lying-in chamber. It is the 15th century. A wealthy merchant's wife, or perhaps a queen, is preparing to give birth. But this is not a medical event. It is a ritual, a ceremony of shadow. Weeks before the due date, the woman takes to her chamber. She withdraws from the world. The windows are shuttered, the curtains are drawn, the keyhole is plugged with wax. The room is kept in perpetual twilight. The air is thick, hot, and silent. This darkness is intentional. It is believed to protect the mother's eyes, which are thought to be weak. It is meant to simulate the womb itself. But for the woman lying in the bed, it must feel like a rehearsal for the tomb. She is surrounded by women. This is a gynoecium, a female kingdom. Men,
Husbands, doctors, fathers are strictly forbidden. They wait outside, pacing the hallway. Inside, the midwife rules. She is the general of this small, stifling army. But before the door is closed, the woman has done something chilling. She has made her will. She has confessed her sins. She has said goodbye to her other children. She knows the statistics, even if she doesn't have the numbers. Childbirth is the leading cause of death for women of her age. It is her crusade, her war. And like a knight strapping on his armor, she prepares to face a battle from which she might not return. The room smells of caudle, a warm, spiced drink of ale or wine mixed with oatmeal and sugar. It is meant to give her strength, but beneath the spices there is the metallic scent of fear. The women whisper, they pray, they wait for the first contraction to shatter the silence.
When the pain begins, the medieval mind turns not to science, but to magic. The midwife does not have forceps. She does not have oxytocin. She has sympathetic magic. She orders that every lock in the house be opened. Every chest, every door, every cupboard, every knot must be untied. The husband, waiting outside, must loosen his belt. The servants must untie their shoelaces. The logic is symbolic. If the house is open, the womb will open. If there are no knots in the ropes, there will be no knots in the birth. They bring out the relics, a girdle, supposedly worn by the Virgin Mary or a local saint, is draped over the woman's huge belly. They place gemstones in her hands, jasper or eagle stone. These are believed to have the power to hold the baby in or draw it out, depending on how they are used. It is a desperate attempt to control a biological force that feels uncontrollable. The pain is seen as inevitable, the curse of Eve. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. To try to numb it too much was sometimes seen as going against God's will. So she endures. She sweats in the stifling heat of the room. The midwife massages her with oil of lilies. She encourages her, but if things go wrong, the mood in the room shifts instantly from hope to terror. If the baby is stuck, if the presentation is wrong, the midwife's tools are limited. She might try to turn the child. She might shake the bed, trying to use gravity. But there are no monitors to check the heartbeat. No way to know if the cord is wrapped around a neck. The baby is a mystery, hidden in the dark. And if the labor drags on for days, the woman's strength begins to fade. The caudle is no longer enough. The prayers become frantic. The room feels smaller, tighter, like a coffin closing in.
In the worst cases, when the mother is failing and the baby will not come, the decision is made. It is a decision that haunts the history of medicine. The priority shifts from the body to the soul. In the Catholic Middle Ages, an unbaptized child cannot enter heaven. They are doomed to limbo. So the goal becomes saving the baby's soul, even at the cost of the mother's life. The caesarean section, named after Julius Caesar, though he was likely not born this way, as his mother survived. In the Middle Ages, a caesarean was almost universally fatal. It was not a surgery. It was a last resort, usually performed only after the mother had died or was taking her final breaths. The midwife, or a surgeon called in at the last minute, would make the cut, not to save the mother, but to extract the infant alive just long enough to sprinkle water on its forehead and say the words of baptism. It is a grim image, a life exchanged for a soul. And even if the birth was successful, the danger was not over. Childbed fever, puerperal fever, an infection of the uterus caused by bacteria on the unwashed hands of the attendants. It strikes days later. The fever spikes. The woman becomes delirious. She has survived the battle only to be cut down by the invisible assassin in the aftermath. For the medieval woman, motherhood was a game of Russian roulette played with every pregnancy. But some women looked at this reality, at the danger, at the subordination to a husband, at the terror of the lying-in chamber, and they said no. They chose a different path, a path that was neither wife nor nun, a path of independence that terrified the church even more than witchcraft. We leave the hot, blood-scented air of the birthing room. We travel to the bustling cities of the Low Countries, to Belgium, to a walled community within the city, a beguinage. Here, women live together, without men, without vows. They work, they own property, they answer to no one but themselves. They are the Beguines, and in a world that demanded women be either servants of a man or servants of a convent, they dared to be simply free.
We leave the stifling heat of the birthing chamber and the terrified whispers of the midwives. We travel north, to the mist-shrouded flatlands of Flanders, to the bustling medieval cities of Bruges, Ghent, and Antwerp. The streets here are noisy, merchants shouting, carts rattling. But if you turn a corner and pass through a heavy wooden gate, the noise vanishes. You are standing in a beguinage, a city within a city. It is a world of neat brick houses surrounded by a green courtyard. There is a church, a bakery, a brewery. It is peaceful, orderly, and everywhere you look, there are women. They are dressed in simple grey or blue robes. They wear white headdresses. They look like nuns, but they are not nuns. These are the Beguines, and for a few centuries in the Middle Ages, they represented a radical and dangerous experiment in freedom. In the 13th century, Europe had a problem, the woman problem. There were simply too many women. The Crusades, the wars, and the diseases had decimated the male population. There were not enough husbands to go around, and the convents were full. To become a nun required a dowry. You had to pay to marry Christ. If you were poor, or if the local abbey was full, you had nowhere to go. You were redundant, a burden on your family. So the women created their own solution. They built these communities. They took no permanent vows. They promised chastity only while they lived there. They could leave at any time. They could return to the world, marry and have children if they chose. But while they were here, they answered to no man. They elected their own leader, the Grande Dame. They managed their own money. They worked. They were weavers, lace makers, nurses, teachers. They were economically independent. Imagine the shock of this to the medieval mind. A woman was defined by who owned her father, her husband, or the church. To be masterless was to be unnatural. But here, in the quiet courtyards of the beguinage, thousands of women were proving that they did not need a master to survive. Life in the beguinage was a balance of piety and industry. The air smelled of clean linen, beeswax, and the faint metallic scent of the loom. They were mystics. They sought a direct connection with God. They didn't just pray in Latin words they didn't understand. They wrote poetry. They wrote songs in their own language. They spoke of God not as a distant judge, but as a lover, as a presence to be felt in the heart. This was their strength,
but it was also their danger. The church began to watch them. They saw women reading, women writing, women preaching to other women, and they saw a threat. In the medieval hierarchy, the priest stood between the person and God. He was the gatekeeper. The Beguines were bypassing the gate. They were suggesting that a woman's soul was just as capable of touching the divine as a man's, and they were doing it without the control of a husband. The Beguine became a synonym for a woman who was too independent, too spiritual, too unregulated. Rumors began to spread. They were accused of heresy, of the heresy of the free spirit, the idea that if you loved God enough, you could do no sin, that you were above the laws of the church. It was a distortion, a lie used to curb their power. But in an age of inquisitions, a lie is as deadly as the truth. The atmosphere in the Beguinage began to change. The peaceful silence was broken by the arrival of inquisitors, men in dark robes asking questions, demanding to see books, demanding to know what was whispered in the dormitories at night. The women closed ranks. They hid their writings. They lowered their heads. But for some, it was too late.
The tragedy of the Beguines has a name, Marguerite Porete. She was a French Beguine, a mystic, a brilliant writer. She wrote a book called The Mirror of Simple Souls. It was a beautiful, complex text about the love between the soul and God. It was widely read. It was beloved. But she made a mistake. She didn't ask a bishop for permission to write it. She claimed that a soul annihilated in love didn't need the church. She was arrested. She was brought before the Inquisitor in Paris. They demanded she recant. They demanded she withdraw the book. Marguerite did something extraordinary. She refused to speak. For a year and a half, while rotting in a dungeon, she maintained a total, defiant silence. She would not validate their authority with her words. So they burned her. In 1310, in the Place de Grève in Paris, Marguerite Porete was tied to a stake. The faggots of wood were piled high. A crowd gathered. She stood there, silent to the end, as the flames rose. She was the first author in the Middle Ages to be executed for a book. Her death sent a shockwave through the Beguinages. The golden age of women's independence was over. The church clamped down. The Pope issued decrees. The Beguines were ordered to submit to male supervision or dissolve. Many Beguinages were closed. The women were forced into convents or back into the servitude of the family. The walls that had protected them were torn down or repurposed, but some survived. In Flanders, they compromised. They accepted the oversight. They became quieter, smaller, but they endured. The last Beguine, a woman named Marcella Patin, died in 2013, just a few years ago. The Beguines show us a glimpse of a different history, a history where women carved out a space of their own, a room of their own, but they also show us the price. In the Middle Ages, if a woman stood too tall or walked too freely, the fire was always waiting. We leave the brick courtyards and the smell of smoke. We leave the women who tried to live without men. We travel now to the end of the line. What happens to a woman when her purpose is fulfilled, when her husband dies, when she is no longer a wife but a relic of a marriage? We are going to meet the widow. But she is not free. She is entering a new prison, a prison of black cloth, social erasure, and the terrifying legal limbo of the widow's weeds, the woman who must vanish while she is still alive.
The fire in the Beguinage has died down.
We leave the independent women of Flanders behind, and we travel to the very end of the journey, to the moment when the story is supposed to be over. We are standing in a grand manor house, or perhaps a humble cottage. It does not matter. The smell is the same: beeswax candles, incense, and the silence of a house that has lost its master. A man has died. The funeral is over. The guests have gone. And now a woman stands alone in the center of the room. She was a wife, a mother, a mistress of the house, but in the beat of a heart her identity has dissolved. She has become a relict, a leftover. She is a widow, and society demands that she vanish. She begins the ritual of the widow's weeds. The term comes from the Old English word wade, meaning garment. But these are not just clothes, they are a uniform of grief, a suit of armour designed to repel the world. She puts on the dress. It is black, always black, and made of the dullest, coarsest fabric available, bombazine or heavy wool. It cannot shine, it cannot reflect light. She is absorbing the darkness of the grave. Then the veil, the barb, a piece of pleated linen that covers the chin and the neck, reaching right up to the lower lip. It mimics the shroud of a corpse. It silences her mouth before she even speaks. Over this, a black veil of crepe is draped over her head. It is thick, heavy. When she looks out, the world is dim, grey. The sun is blocked. She is living in a personal twilight. This is not a mourning period of a few weeks. In the medieval and early modern world, a widow might be expected to wear this for a year or two, or the rest of her life. She becomes a walking shadow. When she moves through the village, people step aside, not out of respect, but out of a strange mix of fear and superstition. She is touched by death. She is a reminder of mortality. She is unlucky. She has survived the dangers of childbirth. She has survived the control of her husband. But now she faces the danger of erasure. She is still alive, but society has already begun to bury her.
But the black dress is only the outward symbol. The real battle is for survival. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman's financial security was almost entirely tethered to a man. When the rope snapped, she was adrift. The law promised her a dower, usually 1/3 of her husband's property for her use during her lifetime. It sounds fair, but the reality was a vicious legal brawl. The heir to the estate was often her eldest son, or, if she had no children, her husband's brother. These men wanted the land, they wanted the money, and the widow eating into their profits for 20 years was an inconvenience. So the pressure begins. The widow's quarantine. By law, she is allowed to stay in her husband's house for 40 days after his death. 40 days to mourn, 40 days to figure out where to go. And then, she is often evicted. Imagine the cruelty of it. A woman who has run a household for 30 years, who has raised the children who are now turning against her, is told to pack her chest. She is pushed out into the dower house, a smaller, colder cottage on the edge of the estate. Or she is sent back to her own family, a humiliating return to childhood dependency. She is vulnerable. If she is young and wealthy, she is a target for raptus again. Men see a rich widow not as a person, but as a bank vault that can be opened with a forced marriage. If she is poor, she is invisible. The poor widow is a stock character in medieval literature. The old woman gathering sticks in the forest, the woman selling eggs for a pittance. She has fallen through the cracks of the feudal system. She belongs to no one, and therefore
No one is responsible for her. She sits in her cold cottage. The fire is low. She is wrapped in her black wool, invisible in the dark. She has outlived her usefulness to the patriarchal machine. She is a ghost who still needs to eat.
And yet, in this erasure, there was a strange kind of freedom. If a widow could hold on to her money, if she could fight off the suitors and the greedy sons, she entered a unique legal category. Femme sole, a woman alone. For the first time in her life, she was her own legal guardian. She could sign contracts. She could own land in her own name. She could run a business. The guilds of London were full of widows continuing their husbands' trades, ironmongers, brewers, weavers. Some women flourished in the weeds. They realized that the veil, while heavy, also hid them from the scrutiny of men. They became powerful matriarchs. They manipulated the system that tried to crush them. But for most, it was a quiet fading, a long, slow retreat into the background of the tapestry. We look back at the medieval woman now. We see her standing in the shadow of history. We see the iron bridle on her face, the water dripping from her dress, the stone walls of the anchorhold closing her in, the black veil covering her eyes. It is a history of silence, of control, of a world that was terrified of the female voice and the female body. But listen closely to the silence. It is not empty. It is filled with endurance. They survived the iron. They survived the water. They survived the fire. They wove their stories into the margins of the manuscripts. They whispered them through the squints of the church walls. They are the ancestors of our resilience. And so, our journey through the silent voices comes to an end. We have walked the dark roads of the past and witnessed the hardest realities of being a woman in a world made for men. The iron mask is rusted now. The ducking stool has rotted away. The walls of the Beguinage are open to the tourists. The silence has been broken. As you lie here tonight in the safety and warmth of the modern world, take a moment to honour them. The Scolds, the witches, the Anchoresses, the camp followers, the widows. Let their memory be a comfort, not a nightmare. They walked through the dark so we could walk in the light. The candle flickers one last time. The shadows recede. The book is closed. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. If these stories touched you, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps us keep the history alive. Sleep well, my friends. The night is yours, and the past is at rest. Good night.